much thinner than a human hair. She was even able to categorize them because Raman microscopy allows us to type the material, meaning it can identify exactly what kind of plastic is present. Not always, though. There are limitations because plastic is rarely pure. It is usually coated in substances designed to make it harder or softer, to make it flame retardant, or to enhance its color. In short, there are a range of additives used to make it better suited for its intended purposes. And the uses for plastic are, I think, infinite. It is the second most widely used material in the world after concrete, so it is everywhere. We found it there, and as you mentioned, the paper we published in 2021 caused quite a stir. Naturally, the idea of plastic inside the placenta, and therefore inside our babies, was something that, understandably, shocked people. But looking at it that way isn't entirely correct, because the plastic we find in the oceans is the same plastic now being found in our babies. It's a closed loop. Let's be clear. Of the millions and millions of tons of plastic we produce, less than 10% is recycled, while over 90% is discarded into the environment. Discarded into the environment means that, over time, the plastic degrades into smaller and smaller particles, eventually becoming very small, microplastics, or even extremely tiny, nanoplastics. These particles travel down the rivers, reach the seas, and colonize the ocean. They are ingested by the fish we subsequently eat, and so they find their way into us. So plastic undergoes a cycle. I wouldn't call it a virtuous cycle, but a vicious one, because over 90% of it is abandoned in the environment. Italy is actually a particularly virtuous country, in quotes, meaning it recycles about 10% of its plastic. That makes it one of the most responsible countries in the world in this regard. However, the fact remains that more than 90% still ends up in the environment. So how does it get inside us? How do these micro and nanoplastics enter our bodies? They do so through three primary pathways. The first is through our food. We've mentioned fish full of plastic, which we eat. But it's not just fish. The most significant way plastic enters our bodies, from a quantitative standpoint, is through plastic bottles. Plastic bottles used for water or carbonated drinks are a dramatic and utter absurdity. Plastic itself is not inherently bad, of course. It is a material that can be used to create wonderful things. Think of medical prosthetics, or the sheathing that brings high-speed fiber optics into our homes. In short, many highly useful applications. And in those contexts, it's fine. But when we use it for something as foolish as water bottles, I am not a fan of mineral water producers, and the feeling is mutual. So, we use it for 10 minutes, for a soda or water, and then toss it into the environment. That is a foolish way to utilize an otherwise highly useful material. So, as we said, one of the pathways through which plastic enters the human body is through the digestive system. Another is through olfaction, the nose, and breathing, because there is a massive amount of plastic dispersed in our atmosphere. For example, every time you hit the brakes in a car, the friction releases thousands upon thousands of microplastic particles into the environment. So, if you live near a highway or a busy intersection with traffic lights, you are inhaling vast amounts of micro and nanoplastics. So we've covered the intestinal tract and the respiratory system. The third pathway is through the skin. Clothes. Specifically, the so-called fast fashion industry. Fast fashion is one of the most terrible blights on the world today. You may not realize this, but there are companies, mostly Chinese, but not exclusively, though the Chinese firms have the highest revenues. So those companies manufacture clothing imitating high-end designers, while entirely bypassing the traditional supply chain. They produce these synthetic garments that perfectly imitate natural fibers, but they only last one season, often even less. Then they are discarded. Aside from the fact that we wear them directly against our skin,